VR for most of its existence has had a fairly high cost of entry for an array of mostly gimmicky titles. Luckily, there's been a huge transition in recent years, not only making the devices more affordable and capable, but having quality games and features to justify the leap into the space. MetaQuest 3 from the outside seems to be the perfect entry console, and for the most part, it will be the perfect entry console for most users. That's because the MetaQuest 3 is a fully fledged, self-contained console. This means that you don't need to buy anything else, such as a decent gaming rig or base stations to track your movement. This makes it the perfect opportunity for the average Joe. The console ships with two storage capacities, 128GB and 512GB. As of writing this, they are the same price on Amazon, so it's a no-brainer to get the more capacity, especially since it isn't all that much more expensive than when I originally bought the 128GB model. Now, in the future, if the 128GB model is priced accordingly, then I would still probably stick with a higher capacity, unless you have a gaming rig. But even then, I do kind of regret going for the smaller console, as I do want to buy more exclusive titles, and updates to the system are taking increasingly more memory of its limited capacity. I feel that the overall build is fine. I honestly haven't faced any issues with quality or overheating of the unit itself. I personally think that the included strap is fairly comfortable. This is really surprising because I have a very big and oddly shaped head, but the strap is already starting to yellow despite only a few instances of decent amounts of sweating. I would say that my biggest gripe is probably the included face cover. While it's fine and has 3 depths of adjustment to help compensate for noses and glasses, I did experience the occasional hiccup where the mechanism would get stuck and I'd have to force it in order to get it working properly again. The overall fit of the face cover is great for me. Even with glasses, I can manage to put it on the lowest setting, but it had to be adjusted to the 3rd setting for my mom, and even then, it felt a bit uncomfortable for her. This really sucks because if you struggle to see at distance, you will need to wear glasses. Unfortunately, swapping out this face cover for a third-party option is awkward, and the whole process just feels wrong. It feels like it's going to break the whole time, and while I would encourage a third-party option for better breathability, I can see why many would be intimidated by the process or even unaware of the option. Once you have the headset on, it is a pretty slick experience, especially with the latest update. As you can see, you launch into the pass-through mode, which allows for an augmented reality experience. It's fairly usable when interacting with world objects, but there is some visual noise and loss of visual clarity. My experience with it really has me severely questioning the crib building ad, as there is no way that if I'm struggling to assemble something that I would put this thing on my head. But at least the UI interaction is pretty solid at this point. It allows you to either control it with your hands or the controllers. While they have made some adjustments, and I don't like the fact that they got rid of the button to change the viewing distance of the screen, I do feel that interacting with the screens and buttons and keyboards feels really intuitive and responsive, especially since the latest update. This update also fixed some of the gesture recognition I had issues with in my earlier experience with the console. Voice controls are also an option, and while I didn't test them, I think they will struggle with various accents and talking speeds, just like we do as humans. The controllers also interface well with console and have visual representations of your hands. They also add HUD elements which allow for intuitive battery tracking. However, it's also important to note that your headset requires light to track either your controllers or hands. This means that if you want to watch a movie in bed while your partner is asleep, it is possible, but the experience of interacting with elements with the controllers isn't the best. And you will also have to buy some headphones, as the built-in speakers aren't isolated. Speaking of movies, the entertainment experience that you get can vary depending on the app that you use. Most of my experience has been on Pluto, which is fairly decent. This app launches into their live TV section, which is graciously muted. However, for those in the UK that want to watch on demand and legally ditch the TV license, this does technically cause a legal gray area. I'm not a big fan of how they execute the big screen mode either. While it is big and looks great, not allowing for it to instantly black out on immersive mode is really baffling. You can adjust the dimming with its slider, but this feels awkward, and the meta immersion world is far too bright and distracting for it not to be turned off. Another app I tried was YouTube, which not only handles these elements better, but has a much bigger screen. Its experience makes you feel like you're in a small cinema, as opposed to just a big screen. But no matter the screen size, interacting with all these elements with your hands and being able to touch and swipe them is really cool and makes for a great casual experience. But for the serious gamer, controllers are required. And fortunately, the built-in gaming experience is actually pretty good. I used the built-in recorder for all the footage that you see in this video, and while it will give you a more accurate picture of what this console is able to do, it won't be as immersive or really fully reflect the in-game visuals. The first game we'll look at is an included augmented reality game called First Encounters. This game requires you to scan your play area, and when the scan is complete, the aliens can't interface with objects in the room by climbing on them or hiding behind them. Not only is this game fun, I feel that it is a good transition game, especially if you're concerned about getting motion sickness while in VR. This is because while parts of your room are digitally destroyed, there are always elements of your room in your vision, allowing you to have much better orientation. Another game I looked at is Kizuna AI Touch the Beat, which is a rhythm game that does have a few issues with position recognition, but I feel is a visually average game from what you could expect from the console. But if you do have a killer PC, you can link it by USB-C or Wi-Fi using the MetaQuest link. And from here, you have access to more third-party stores, such as Steam, SideQuest, or AppLab. When I purchased this console, I had around 500 VR exclusive or VR compatible titles in my Steam library, so having the ability to play these games was a critical feature that I needed for my console. And for the most part, it is a pretty good experience. While I have only recently bought a long enough cable to warrant a physical connection, all my experience up to this point has been wireless, and when it works surprisingly well. To get this footage you see, I am streaming from my PC in a different room with both doors open, and while there is some clarity issues, I can probably pin up most of my problems on not having great internet, as I think mine is capped at 60 megabits per second. But to show its capabilities, I decided to play Fallout 4 VR, and while it isn't the pinnacle of VR, it is a fairly modern port that plays reasonably well, despite some odd choices. Honestly, playing this game in VR legitimately changed my playstyle and made for an interesting experience that I plan on returning to later. Another title I tried is Arizona Sunshine, which is a stand-in for a lot of early VR titles, and while I found some elements confusing, it's probably because I wanted to interact with things as if they were real, but much like most early video games, I found myself struggling with clunky controls, at least until you get used to them. But overall, I think that the MetaQuest 3 gets a decent on the A scale. I think the biggest key factor holding it back is accessibility issues. While there are different levels of interaction from different titles, including some being purely visual, the inconsistency and lack of clarity of what is expected from the user for the game or experience is lacking. For example, a hands-free mode would do wonders for the Pluto app. Adult VR experiences have had the basics of this concept mostly solved for years, and the failure to act as a bridge between the user and these apps feels like Meta is neglecting the experience. But if you do want good value for money and a good gateway into VR, then I think the MetaQuest 3 is the best option around. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Consider checking out my last video on the history of women in gaming, and subscribe. Until then, this has been Rob the Slob, and I'll see you in the virtual commute.